So now I'm going to break apart those big masses. It doesn't really matter which one I start with. Once I just keep stepping back, and as I refine each mass, I respond to it, look at it in context of the entire piece, see if it's working. Really, just that stepping back is probably the most important part of this stage. So I might just start with the ship and get that looking fairly finished, and at least that sort of the most focal element of the piece is done. So you can use a combination of hog and the sharp synthetic. One thing I think I need to do is maybe just take the edge off this cool white and later on maybe lighten that to compensate for it. So if I lighten and warm up this side, it starts to conflict with a little bit with the value in the cloud. So in turn I have to lighten that. So I'm just going to keep that at the back of my mind. So if I lighten one part of the cool white, I need to lighten all parts of it. Look at my warm whites. I might lift them up a little bit more towards the white. I'm not going to go in for the fine detail that crosses over into the sky just yet. I'm breaking apart this shape a little bit so that it's not quite as uniform. I'd be fairly happy with that. Maybe darken a little bit of the back of the boat. And your piece is maybe completely different to this. You may not need to work on the same things that I'm working on. It's all about just stepping back and looking at what's going on. What I do have is a very dark shadow just underneath the boat. So I'm going to come in with the black, or a black substitute, mix it with a little bit of the very dark green of the sea. So we're bringing them into harmony together. I'm just popping in the shadow, just that crevice shadow that we see just underneath the boat, which helps to just place it down in the water rather than looking like it's floating up on top a little bit. A little edge there I need to sort out. And that's okay for the next stage, which will be detail. So let's go on to the sky before I forget, and let's lighten up this value a little bit. But before I do that, let me just look around at the clouds and see if there's anything else going on. Now it's very subtle, but what I do see is a darker sort of lilac grey up around the clouds which are higher in the sky, therefore they are closer to us. And they then get lighter as they recede into the distance. So there's a more contrast on these, which means a darker aspect and then a lighter, warmer aspect. Okay. So just closing up these gaps. Being careful we don't drag lots of blue paint into the lilac of the clouds. The lilac and the yellow of the clouds. As this all recedes then it's getting to a lighter lilac. And now I've got this. In reality it's sort of a mix of the warm white and the cool white together. And as it goes up in the sky, it takes on a greater contrast. Now before I finish with those clouds, is there anything else I need to do to them? I do need to join the edges, but I think I may do that with the blue instead of the purple of the clouds. So I want to lift up a stronger, much stronger cobalt turquoise there, because that's the colour that really jumps out at me. It's one of my favourite colours. Okay, let's come down and put in a stronger bit of paint there. So more saturated paint, thicker paint, so that it has real presence. Down into the very warm green down at the bottom. Okay. Come down now into the water. Let's look at our shadow of the water. If there's nothing we can think of to do, don't do anything. So we don't want to paint just for the sake of it. That usually leads to disaster, where we overwork the paint. I definitely want to lift up this green. And while we're on the water, there's one other thing I need to look at that I haven't looked at till now, which is the spray, or the sea foam. So we have a cool version and a warm version. Cooler, which is a bluish white. So white with a touch of the blue in it. Let's test it. Oops. Picked up a huge lump of cobalt turquoise there by mistake. So the cool white, yeah, that's okay. So it sort of skirts around the cliffs or the rocks, creating a hard edge up against the rocks, and then fading out these sort of, in a similar pattern actually to what we see with the clouds in the sky. We have some more here. Now, do we have any cool ripples in the distant dark parts of the sea? Well, if we don't, I think it's a good idea just to put a couple in, which you'll see in a minute will give context to the warmer aspects. So I would make the warm ripples a slightly greenish yellow. Now that's slightly, just a touch of the green in it. And look, if we then pull some of the warmer ripples in, you'll be able to read the difference between the light and the shade areas. So as these ripples recede, or tops of the waves, they get much, much smaller and fainter. So one last thing is the rocks in the foreground. Now I'm going to come back in and take a little more care with the shape. So hard edges up on the top. A good painting is always a combination of hard and soft edges. Hard edges are what we read, it makes it look competent, and the soft edges are what give it atmosphere. That's probably enough for stage 2. So the last stage I'm just going to work on edges, detail, accents, impasto, just those finishing little touches.